Eddie Williams, I definitely want to thank you for jumping on the podcast. I really appreciate it. The stuff that you've been putting out on social media is absolute fire. The first thing that I wanted to dive into, because it's something that I've made videos on the past, is gluttony in the church,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to pastors. It kind of saddens me that I feel like today, at least where I live and what I've seen, we have pastors who are incredibly unhealthy, incredibly out of shape. They're up in a leadership position, being a pastor,
Yeah.
and they're preaching the word to a congregation of people who subconsciously look at them and realize that gluttony must be okay. That the leader of my church actually has no self-control when it comes to the fork and knife,
Yeah.
and I feel like I can kind of put that on top of, also, I feel like we are in a nation of leaders in the church that aren't the most masculine people to begin with. One, letting themselves
Right.
go like that isn't a trait of necessarily being a leader, demonstrating self control, discipline. It's just a problem that I feel that there is in the American church today. I mean, I don't see these guys, if there's a problem inside the church, something bad happened, they're not going to be the first ones to like fend off
Right.
such problem, or even in public. I don't think they're going to be the ones who are going to stand up for what's right and wrong by the mere fact of the way that they live their life. That's just
Right.
my little soapbox, but we
Yeah,
can
man.
stick to just the unhealthy pastor in the church
Yeah.
today.
Well, yeah, man. I mean, thanks for having me on again, Jesse. I'm excited to be on with you and get to know a little bit about you over the last few weeks, and love what you're doing, man. So very excited to be on. Well, I'm a pastor, so
Mm-hmm.
that's a little introduction. Played in the NFL. I've cared a lot about health and wellness. I've seen the overlap. I think part of my story is seeing some of my family sort of slowly decay over the years from modern major Western diseases. And as you look at the landscape, it's not just pastors, but certainly pastors have a leadership responsibility. But if you just look at all of the United States for a second, so let's start bigger picture and then like sort of focusing on pastors. Chronic disease is the sort of the biggest feature of the modern Western world. That's just where we're at, right? It's one of the biggest things that we export out to. I think Chris Kresser talks about that in his book Unconventional Medicine. Like, we export unhealth across the world.
Mm-hmm.
1 in 2 Americans has a chronic disease. So 1 in 2. So that's when we talk about chronic disease, we're talking about largely controllable diseases that we have. Things like asthma, things like hypertension, diabetes, things like cancers, things like Alzheimer's. These are things that largely we contribute to with our lifestyle choices. So, we can all get cancer other ways, but there's certain cancers we know are caused by the things that we eat.
Mm-hmm.
Things like heart attacks, things like, heart disease being the number one killer in the United States is something that's largely, to a large degree, controllable by what we eat. So
Mm-hmm.
if America is unhealthy, then we have to ask ourselves about the systemic issues as to why. Like, why is America so unhealthy? So 91%, for instance, of prescriptions filled in the United States are filled because of things that are largely controllable through diet.
This episode is sponsored by Black Label Meat. Black Label Meat only sells premium quality meat that is grass-fed, grass-finished, and they do regenerative grazing practices. Check them out now, blacklabelmeatcompany.com, and use the code Jesse for 10% off.
3/4 of all of our visits to doctors are for chronic illnesses. So we're starting to see a pattern here. And then you see the government's connection to this. You see big businesses, big pharma, big foods connection to this. 99% of all Medicare dollars go to chronic illness. So things that we are largely preventable. This is a really massive deal. Now, spending across the United States by 2030 will be $47 trillion. So now you're seeing this bigger systemic issue. It's our physical health individually, it's our collective health as a whole, and then it's also now the United States, the economics of it, and it's the corporate dollars and big pharma's profiting off this as well. So this is this massive, big issue. Now, pastors are supposed to be like the spiritual guides. So like, how do we how do we help people like on a, on a day-to-day basis sort of live their lives healthfully, whether it's about their marriage, whether it's about their friendships, whether it's about their actual legitimate faith, their prayer life, whatever it is. The thing that gets neglected so often is the physical, and that's large to a large degree. We've sort of separated the physical and spiritual worlds. Like we really have. We've separated these two worlds, and that's really this like outplay of something called Gnosticism. Gnosticism is this third century, the third century idea that propped up that sort of separated the body from the spirit. So to a large degree, God created us in the beginning as these singularly holistic beings, mind, body, spirit, designed to worship God. Somewhere along the lines of the third century, we sort of get the separate. We see that the physical body from the Gnostics says a physical body is evil. The spiritual is sort of this like place where we're able to connect with God. And it's like largely it could either be evil in sin, or it could be largely good through like either good works or, in the Christian perspective, grace. Jesus saves us.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is trickled into the way we see food. It's trickled in the way we see a lot of things. It's trickled in the way we see things like abortion, like euthanasia. The physical body is completely distinct and different from the spirit. So what does that have to do with food and like fad pastors, so to speak? Well, it has a lot to do with this in the sense that pastors sort of have become byproducts of the culture they live in and swim in. We haven't been as attuned as we should to seeing that we actually are these holistic beings, connected mind, body, spirit. That's how God created us. And so as a result, we've been able to say, well, whatever happens to my body, it's not as big of a deal as long as it doesn't happen to my spirit as well. And so if much of common knowledge tells me that Doritos and pizza and ice cream is largely fine, and I can still worship Jesus on the side, then I'm good. But what we do know is that the mind, body, and spirit are well connected. We're connected beings. I mean, Paul talks about it all the time. Talks about it in 1 Corinthians 9. He talks about your body being a temple. He talks about the fact that, if your body is defiled sexually, then it defiles the spirit. Absolutely. And we should be able to apply that same principle across the board. If we defile the body in any manner, we are not stewarding our bodies effectively, and we aren't being the best followers of Jesus, and we're not being the best people we can potentially be. So I think what's happened is low grade sort of Gnosticism has crept into the church through American modernism, and we've sort of adopted that. They always say, if you want to know about the water, don't ask the fish, because fish don't know they're swimming in water. Pastors have become, and just like most Americans, byproducts of American culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we have our Bibles over here and we've got our diets over there. I would make the case that in the beginning, God created all things very good. And then sin trickles into the world. We see that in Genesis chapter 3. And sin separates us from God, but it also breaks our relationship with one another and breaks our relationship with creation. That's a large part of the curse in Genesis 3. Thorns and thistles are produced. And so when sin and these breaking of relationships gets involved, and then you throw in economics, you throw in people trying to make profit off of food, you throw in things like taste and preference and freedom and all these different things, you have basically Americans / pastors accidentally breathing in the culture's ideologies instead of taking the word to culture and saying, like, how should we approach something like a Twinkie or a church potluck? How should I look at my food differently and see that I should be eating food as close to the way God originally created it? And seeing that, hey, economics have gotten themselves at play. People are trying to make money off us. They're engineering foods to be addictive and to change our taste buds. In the same way phones are manipulating our brains and our attention spans, food has manipulated all of our hormones, our hunger hormones like ghrelin, all these different things. And we've become metabolically dysfunctional. We've become sick as a result. And we're never going to find the solution if we think the solution is, well, just run a little bit and get on the scale every now and then, instead of saying, hey, this actually could be a lack of stewardship issue with the physical body. We've just gotten so casual with faith in God over the last however many centuries. And to a large degree, this has always been a problem. It's human nature. But we see it play itself out in this specific way over the last 100 years or so, as the industrial revolution comes into play, as mass food production comes into play, as big economics comes into play, as big agriculture and big pharma get to be commingled in bed together. So pastors are a product of this system. Now, are they victims? Of course not. We're all responsible for what we put into our bodies. I
Mhm.
think as a pastor, pastors actually have a legitimately higher standard to hold ourselves up to. Bible says, hey, you're going to be judged with greater strictness. That's not just knowing your Bible more and not cheating on your spouse. Of course, it includes all those things, but it also includes the general stewardship of the creation that God has given all of mankind. That includes things like our families. It includes things like your budget, and it also includes things like your body. We need to be able to be better stewards of our body. So that's like a 5,000 foot overview.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's clear. I can rant at you for hours, so I should probably just pause there and let you comment.
No, man, we can go down that whole rabbit hole
Yeah,
because I'm on the same page with you on everything. And like it's not an accident that we've allowed ourselves to do it because you and I live in the same world. I'm almost 40. I have a six pack. I go to the gym. I eat right. I have a I have sons who they don't care to eat junk food because I've never allowed them to eat it. So they know when I go, okay, you can have a piece of that junk food, what it does to their body and how they suddenly don't feel good. I have a tummy ache. It's like, yeah, it's because he's been raised on
right.
elk meat, grass fed, grass finished beef, fruits, squashes,
Love it.
things of that nature his entire life. Same with my other
Right.
son. I have another younger son. So when he goes to a party, he doesn't even really even ask to have a piece of cake because he
Love
just
that.
knows it's going to be bad. Now, will he take a bite? Yeah, and I don't care when he takes a bite going to his buddy's party. But it irks me when we do like a Awana for my kids, and every single day that there's this kids Bible study group for all these school aged kids, they're
Yeah.
serving cupcakes, they're serving French fries, and I'm like, what do I have to do to buy all the food for this class? Oh, well, that's not how it works. It's like, but us as Christians, we should be willing to have open, honest conversations about us actually feeding our children food that's about one ingredient away from rat poison.
Seriously.
And they'll often look at me like I'm crazy. And it's like, but no, you have access to the same information I have. And you made a good point of how if we just ate how God created the world, how he created Earth, those same fundamentals of just non processed foods, we wouldn't have any of these problems. We wouldn't even be having this discussion.
Yeah. So true. Yeah, and I mean, I know pastors from all around the world, and we support church plants around the world. I've been overseas, and I've talked to pastors and say, "Hey, man, why are Americans so fat? Like, why don't pastors?" And I've had a specific guy from on another continent say, like, what is it about pastors in America in particular that
Mhm.
they don't think that the body matters? And I was like, well, what are you talking about? This is maybe 7 years ago, and he's like, well, like, look how big everybody is. Everybody's sick. They're all taking pills. Don't they understand that God made the body? Yeah, like what a funny observation that someone should take note of that, right? Like that God made the human body, and it's not this popular, I don't know, evangelical talking point, like say, caring for your money is. You got like Dave Ramsey types, or caring for your families are. You've got all sorts of like
Mhm.
faith-based family ministries. The food we consume was the very way we had a relationship with God from the beginning. God creates everything in the beginning to be good. He creates mankind to be very good. He says that. And the food is good in the garden for the body. This is a relational aspect. We have been given dominion, the scripture says, over creation, and so we're supposed to have dominion over the land, to work the garden and keep it, to eat off the land for food. God, we see that in the Old Testament. We have animals and livestock to eat. This is all great part of God's creation. What we miss is we see the sort of bastardization of the food supply take place, and maybe that happened right under our noses because it happened so recently. I mean, truthfully, over the course of human history, it is relatively recent how hyper processed food has gotten, but we're a couple generations deep into this process as pastors, and we haven't really seen the fact that, hey, this is actually causing significant problems for people. um, some of it has to do with the fact that we've sort of given over control, or I guess dominion over our diets, to the government, and we've sort of trusted the government's altruistic motives for what's good. The problem is, giant lobbyist groups come in, companies with lots of money come in, and they fund these studies. And the studies obviously are biased towards their product because they're trying to sell product. Makes sense. And all of a sudden, we get these guidelines that come out telling us to eat stuff that we actually now know is terrible for us. This is sort of happened with the demonization of saturated fat about 60 years ago with Ansel Keys and these massive studies, American Heart Association, all these different things that happened where saturated fat was demonized. And we thought, okay, they thought saturated fat is causing heart attacks based on these sort of wonky studies. And so they've believed that, okay, well, we need to find these healthy substitutes, quote unquote. And so we've got things like vegetable oil, canola oil, sunflower, soybean oil, all these different oils that were invented to lubricate machines that now has sort of been leveraged to say, hey, what's a secondary use for this? Why don't we feed it to people? So we bleach the oil so people don't know it's rancid, and we consume it. Well, it's killing people, and heart attacks did not go down as a result of these change. They went up, and we hadn't made any changes. And so I think people of faith have said, hey, like let's just outsource. We believe the best of whatever these like authority figures are telling us. Certainly the FDA wouldn't approve something if they knew it was killing us. And I think over the last 10, 20, maybe 30 years, we're started the sort of the cat's out of the bag, right? We've seen behind the curtain in the Wizard of Oz. The emperor has no clothes, and in fact, these companies have gotten themselves into these governmental agencies and have sort of manufactured their way into being a health food when in fact they're not. And I think pastors haven't done their due diligence. I think we all haven't. We're all responsible, but for me as a pastor, I speak for us and I say, we have a responsibility to people to say, God's good design was that we should eat the food that is close to the way God made it as possible. And that means grass-fed meats. That means vegetables and fruits that are organic. That means eating these types of foods and these foods that are in the middle of the grocery stores, which some of which may or may not be good depending on what they are. But for the vast majority of those things, they're designed to get you addicted and they're designed really to get you addicted so you buy more product. And they're not necessarily designed to kill you, but because people, I don't think they're trying to kill their clientele. I think they're actually just trying to make money. But what's happening is people are dying. They're just dying at far slower rates. That's why Chris Kresser in his book, Unconventional Medicine, calls this a slow motion plague. This is like a plague, but it's in slow motion because chronic disease is killing us slower. So I think this is something that needs to come to attention, and pastors need to see how they've allowed Gnostic ideologies into their thinking around food in ways they don't let it in other areas. And the Bible does talk a lot about gluttony, and it talks a lot about overeating, and it talks a lot about stewardship of the body. And I think those are the things that kind of go missed in this process.
Yeah, being overweight and food abundance, those two things are very, very new to humans. Those are so new to us.
Yeah.
And anytime I'm like, well, take any of these pastors, throw them in the time of Jesus, there wasn't a fat guy around. And people were like, well, there was lentils. All they were eating was lentils. And it's like, no, they were actually practicing fasting. How many of our pastors are actively practicing fasting?
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm going to go with a 0. There is the 0.1, maybe like yourself or some other guys who I've seen on social media who are doing the right thing in that aspect. But other than that, it's just not a thing because it's uncomfortable. It's, and then there was even like in that time, you didn't really hear about the indulging in the food. It was more breaking the bread, sharing, having the discipline to save some of it for later, not just we might not ever eat again. Let's just eat as much as we can type thing. It's like, no, let's ration our foods. I guess the reason that it bothers me so much with pastors is because they are purely in a leadership role. It's not like I don't complain about my fat neighbor. I don't care what that guy does. He has no impact on me or my community. I mean, you could argue that he has some sort of impact on me and my community, but the church is a place where there is a man from the Bible appointed by God to deliver his word. and he needs to lose 60 pounds.
Yeah, that's actually kind of shocking to me how, you know, there's another conversation here too. And that's like, food becomes one of many different sort of addictions that
Mm-hmm.
any number of leaders can go down, right? So like you can go down obviously a porn addiction, or you can go down a
Mm-hmm.
sex addiction, you can go down a drug addiction, alcohol. But food is like this largely acceptable addiction that, the church is like, oh, you're totally fine to do. And you can do publicly for the most part. And it's only until somebody is significantly overweight that you actually even notice and think, wow, that's really not good. When
Mm-hmm.
in fact, you can be totally a food addict, totally killing yourself with chronic disease, and and still not even be that fat. You could have non-alcoholic fatty liver, and you could be, on your way to dying. They say 20% of children today have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Children.
That's crazy.
And so that's a significant thing. So you've got you get your liver enzymes tested, and you get these blood work done. You're saying, wow, we're unhealthy as a nation systemically. But I think pastors, they go down this road of looking for ways, because being a pastor is a hard job. So like, I'm not gonna obviously I'm a pastor. A lot of my best friends are pastors. It's a very difficult job. You're bearing the spiritual burdens of a lot of people, of a lot of obviously respect, and empathy for the situation that a lot of us are in. It is very difficult. So, but our jobs, our roles, our spiritual lives are tied to our morality, and from the outside, I should say. So people are judging you based on that, and so they're looking for, when they're under moments of duress, stress, anxiety, they can't necessarily have the slip ups that like a normal person may or may not. Like, oh man, I just got hammered at a bar and I drank too much, or I slept with someone I wasn't supposed to. And it's like, well, you're not supposed to do that. That's terrible. But you don't necessarily lose your job at the tech company for that. Pastors, there's public shame. You destroyed an entire church. And so, well, hey, if nobody is saying eating trash is bad for you, nobody is saying, or they may say, oh, you shouldn't do it, but no one is saying it's going to cost you your job. And largely, I can do it in social settings, and it's like everyone's celebrating. We're all doing it together. Then a lot of pastors do find themselves there in that spot. And so I have empathy for that, but I do think, Romans 12, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing your mind. It's a spiritual issue that we need to see and discuss. And I think the flinch you mentioned, hey, like I'm almost 40, I got a six pack, I got kids, I'm doing your thing. Like that's awesome. Like I would love to see most men, all if not all men, in your spot. And I think pastors, they start to throw stones at that side to say, well, and it's not just pastors, it's Christians, it's all people like, oh, well, that's vanity. And so you see the bodybuilders on Instagram, you see the fitness models, Instagram models, and you go, that's all vanity. And yeah, that's true. But I think don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, or don't walk off the other side of the ship, which is bodily neglect. I think most pastors are closer to bodily neglect than they are anything near vanity. And so caring for your body is not a vanity thing, it's a worship thing. If you can worship with where you put your money, if you can worship with how you steward your children, how you steward your marriage, and how you steward your vocation, then you can worship God by how you steward your body as well. And anything can become idolatrous. Anything can become idolatrous. I can be idolatrous in my business, idolatrous in anything. So just because you may or may not decide, hey, I want to start caring about my body. Yeah, you could definitely become an idolater as it relates to your body. You can do that with anything though. So that should not be a reason for why you don't care. The reason is that your body's a temple made in the image and likeness of God. And man, what a gift you have. And so, and we could talk about some of the common objections to this, man. I mean, I've heard people say like, well, like, I can't worry about that. Like, I got to be out making disciples of Jesus. I can't be worried about like what I'm eating. And my response is like, well, you're eating though, right? You haven't like fasted for the last 2 weeks while you go make disciples, quote unquote, or whatever, right? No. Okay. So what are you eating? So you're eating tacos, you're eating fried fish, you're eating, drinking Coca-Colas, you're drinking beer. You're still making those conscious decisions to eat. So make the conscious decisions that steward your body, that non-coincidentally make you more proficient in the act of making disciples. It makes you mental clarity's on a high, more energy, you live longer. Great. Guess what? You live longer, you make more disciples. So like those sort of common objections are just, I think, go out the window. So I think pastors have a responsibility to their congregations and to the public to do this. And like, hey, like we already have a ton of responsibility. So what's one more thing that's only going to just make you more clear-headed and more vibrant for the days to come? Why not do it?
Yeah, and humans, especially if you're going out there trying to make disciples, like we judge people on their appearance. I know that if I shake your hand, and even if it's subconscious and realize like this guy's in shape, he takes care of himself, he respects himself, and then I turn around and have the same conversation with a guy who has no self-respect, completely overweight. It's like whether it's business, leadership, we're playing a freaking pickup game of basketball. I'm going with the in shape guy every time, just subconsciously. If
For
the
sure.
exact same conversation were to happen with two people, 100 out of 100 people would pick the in shape person over the out of shape person.
Mhm. Yeah.
It it's even like a primal thing, no matter how far back you want to go, of I can survive something with this guy. I will not be able to survive anything with this guy. There's
Yeah.
just so much to it that's ingrained in our DNA.
Yeah. No, it's factual. I mean, I think pastors already believe that in a number of other ways, and so this isn't a hard jump. So, for instance, if you were listening to a preacher and they were up there being immodest, like right, maybe they wear the deep V-neck and they've got chest muscles out or whatever, or there's a woman leading worship and she's scantily clad. You wouldn't go like, wow, I really respect. You would think, oh well, like why are they dressed like that? Like there's no honor before the Lord there. And so we already believe that appearance does matter. And I think, we're not necessarily saying one person is better than the other. We think, the scripture teaches all sinners are fall short of the glory of God. We all need grace. That's absolutely true. But there is a subliminal aspect to the fact that you do need to care for your body, and that people just read that as something, hey, I'm going to trust that person or I'm not going to trust that person. That's why you typically dress different for formal events. There's a level of respect that someone wearing formal garb carries. That's why the presidents they wear suits. They're not up there in flip flops and a tank top. They're taking care of their body. They're taking care of their dress, and they dress accordingly. And so I think a pastor has to see their physical appearance as part of that. Does that mean you need to be 6% body fat? No, it doesn't mean that. But it does mean you need to carefully steward your body in such a way that people can see that you are setting an example. Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ. I think it's important that we set that example in this way as well. And they might say, another common objection is like, well, Paul didn't talk about like going on a diet. And it's like, well, he spoke to the cultural troubles that were in his day. The cultural troubles that he faced weren't the same ones we face. Like Paul didn't talk about wearing seatbelts. He didn't talk about spending too much time on your iPhone. Like we've got different issues we need to face. And ours is overconsumption. You mentioned abundance of food. Abundance of food genetically changed and wired for you to become an addict on it.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things we need to speak to as pastors. Hey, be careful, keep watch. There are things that are craving you, like sin is crouching at your door. And gluttony is a socially accepted, the least talked about sin probably in the church today. And that's something that pastors need to become acutely aware of. There's a great book by a woman named Nancy Pearcey called Love Thy Body. I recommend this book. And it's about how over time we've created a split between the person and the body. And we see it play itself out in a number of ways. For instance, like sex. It's just sex. It's not who I am. Or, things with abortion. It's just it's not really a human. It's just a clump of cells. It's not a person. It's just a body. We see that in euthanasia or something like that. Like, well, it's no longer a person, so we can just let it die. That's kind of what the book talks about. One of the missing links in that book is food. Well, it doesn't matter what I eat because as long as I love Jesus, I'm good. That's not like that. It becomes a stewardship issue. We need to re-blend the body person together and see that the body and the person were never these separate, distinct ideas, that God made us these holistic beings that worship God with your entire being, mind, body, and spirit.
I love it, man. I feel like we could do the whole entire podcast on this.
Oh, easily.
Yeah, because
Well,
we
like
could
we can
keep
go
going.
down. Yeah, we can go down. I mean, think about like well, I'll just say this, Jesse. I think for me, there's three things I care about most with Ex Nihilo, the podcasts I do, and some of the ministry stuff I do with other pastors. I care about well-being. Like I want you to
Mhm.
feel and perform. I want you to feel good. I think that I'm convinced most people have never felt optimally. They've never even felt as good as they could possibly feel. They've never felt as good as God designed them to feel because they're so bogged down with the garbage. Things like you mentioned, fasting, autophagy, cell cleaning, and cell reproduction. We can feel good by fasting. It's weird that God designs you to have the spiritual practice of fasting that leads to a physical benefit. That is a divine idea. You've never felt as good as you can feel because you've never tried. The second thing is longevity. Be along around it for your family, for your wife, for your kids as long as possible. If you say your entire thing is to go make disciples, great. Then stay alive as long as possible. Don't die at 51 of a massive coronary issue. Stay around as long as you can. And then performance. Like for pastors, like we preach. Preaching's hard. It's, have you ever done any public speaking? But it's like 3 to 4 additional hours of work on your central nervous system with an hour-long talk. That's a lot out of your body. Do you want to perform well? Do you want to perform well for your kids? Do you want to be able to be on stage? Do you want to be talking with people? Do you want to be able to pick up your kid off the ground and wrestle with them? Do you want to be able to head to the basketball courts and play a pickup game of basketball with your son and his friends? Do you want to be able to be with your wife? Like these are all things that matter. So, and then performance. Like we now don't want to just be alive longer. We want to do a good job. There's a level of excellence that comes with eating properly. That is something that is totally a lost art. We think it's all about effort and hard work. There's many studies that talk about how willpower is a finite resource. You can't white knuckle your way through life. Make it easier on yourself by eating a clean, good diet so you can perform at a high level. So those are like the big three things like I care about when I talk to other pastors.
And I think those are great for men in general. I mean, if we don't take care of our body, we cannot go where our mind wants to take it.
That's
Like
right.
it's so true. And just the fact of you talking about live longer, live a more quality of life than quantity, because I know people who are 90 years old. I have
Yeah.
family members who are 90 something years old and they live the most miserable life. And it's like, it didn't have to be that way. But for the last 15 years, so they might be 90, but for the last 15 years since 75,
So true.
they've been living a miserable life because they never took care of themselves. And
Hmm.
even with the studies that like Peter Attia has done on
Hmm.
uh, muscle mass correlated to against all cause mortality,
That's right.
grip strength related to cognitive function, we were literally created to do these things. I mean, I've told people that, you know, gorillas, monkeys, they're way stronger than us in every aspect, pound per pound, except
Mhm.
in grip strength. It's like
Wow.
we carried things everywhere we went, and grip strength being correlated to cognitive function is something that we need to be doing. Just do
That's
farmers
right.
carries, freaking squat, eat
Yes.
well, and you will live a long, productive life.
Right.
It's
But if you
not
don't
that hard.
if you don't see the connection between the physical and the spiritual, you don't think there's any correlations, right? So but there's a total correlation. So if you increase your grip strength, essentially it doesn't mean you sit around doing grip exercises, but
Yeah.
you lift things, right? You work, you
Hmm.
move around, you carry buckets, you work in the yard, you do some squats, you do some deadlifts, you run some Spartan races, whatever it is. Staying active. You're gonna feel better. You're gonna perform better. You're gonna be able to connect with God easier. You're gonna pray more. It's we are not separate, distinct, categorical things. Well, I work on my mind here, and I work on my spirit here. I work on my friendships there, and I work on my body here. No, those things will all go together cohesively
Hmm.
because that's how we were designed. Pretty straightforward, but for some reason we haven't made that connection yet.
Oh, we had that connection, and then we became lazy because it's easy not to do these things. if we're just being honest, we made it an excuse to not do these things because they are hard.
Oh yeah. Well, we're in homeostasis. So like wherever we like to stay the same.
Mm,
Brain likes to stay the same. Bodies like to stay the same. We like comfort. We don't like to move. And so, but it's what's uncomfortable that actually grows us and makes us stronger. It's why we go to school. It's why we work on our minds this way. It's why we read scripture, because we learn and grow. It's not always easy to do it, but it's sort of behind the hard work where we get the benefit and this of all of the sacrifice. And I think we need to do harder things. That's how we were designed to do. That's the working and keeping of the garden. That's the having the dominion over the land. It's the hard work that sort of brings the joy and the comfort. I mean, as a former NFL player, former athlete, my wife's a former college volleyball player. Like, you get to see that like sort of firsthand. So I always kind of try to point people like, go join a sport, go
mhm.
join a team, and like see how sacrifice makes you a better person and makes you in shape. And you're right, like, we have gotten lazy as a society. We got these things and we just click away, and I don't have to move my head very far, and I can get everything I want in the world right here.
Yeah, all the
If I
dopamine hits.
the dopamine, if I want
Yeah.
entertainment, if I want greed, if I want lust, if I want envy, I can get it right here. I don't have to go anywhere for it. And it's kind of a tragedy, to be honest with you.
But in just going down almost a different rabbit hole, I think it's going to separate people even further apart in different classes. I saw I don't know how accurate it is, but I saw a little study that estimated by like 2035, in just 10 years, being in shape is going to be more rare than owning a Rolex or making $1 million a year. And it's
Well,
like,
hey,
just think of
that's
that.
crazy.
It's like, just think of how, because you look at the trends, like for me on my social media, if it's like I follow a guy like you or a couple other guys, it's like they're all in shape. I don't follow a single dude who's out of shape. So I see only in shape. I have only an interest in surrounding myself, whether it's on social media or in person, with like minded guys who I can level up, whether it's in my faith, being a husband, being in shape, finances, anything. So
That's
I don't
awesome.
see a lot of that. But when you go to the store or Costco
Yeah.
or like Whole Foods, it's all you see. It's just out of shape people. And
I
there's
mean,
like the one in shape guy, and you guys got to give each other a head nod. It's like we're the only guys who are in shape in here.
oh, that's brutal. Well, 25% of young adults have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So like, think about under 35s. 1/4 of them have a non-alcoholic fatty liver that is probably going to cause some significant health issues in the near
Mm-hmm.
future. So young people, which, they have the best ability to bounce back from poor diet and from poor lifestyle choices, and are less affected early on because they're just younger and they have more vibrancy and all that stuff. The 25% of those have a significant health challenge. And a lot of them don't even know it because non-alcoholic fatty liver sometimes doesn't show up on the scale right away. And so that's a significant issue. And you want to talk about, the other things it affects. We talk about the body and the spirit, but how about the mind? I mean, 19% of adult women are on antidepressants because of their poor diets. So
Mm-hmm.
that's 20% of women are taking medication that they probably don't need if they were to just change some lifestyle choices. But like, again, it goes back to big pharma connected to big food. Monsanto and Bayer are owned by they're owned together. They're in sync. So you've got agriculture and you've got big pharma, and one product begets another. And so if this bad food that I'm eating or these seed oils, whatever I'm eating, they contribute to poor health, well, don't worry. On the back end, we can hit you with
Yeah.
an SSRI and try to get that serotonin pumping through you without you having to change any lifestyle. Well, that's going to cause some problems. I actually really appreciate that you surround yourself with people. Hey, these are people that are going to make me better, whether it's in my social media feed or whether it's in real life. I think we should probably do more of that, where we're putting ourselves in room where we feel like, hey, I'm the dumbest person in this room. I got a collection of smart people, in shape people that are going to make me better around me. And I think a lot of times people surround themselves with people that are lesser than, so they can feel better about themselves, and that's happening across the country.
It really is. And it it saddens me, but it's one of the reasons why I do this podcast,
Yeah,
specifically targeted towards men. And it's interesting because on my Instagram, I get more DMs and comments from women, and it'll be related to their husband for his lack thereof. And it's like, man, men can also be so prideful that they're not the ones reaching out. It's their wives reaching out because of the desperation that they have there in their relationship.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, I get similar dynamic. So I
Hmm.
get a lot of followers that are women, and a lot of them are reaching out like, "Hey, man, that would be so great if my husband did something like this." And
Yeah.
it's not as if they're being like promiscuous or something. It's
Nope.
that they genuinely long for their husband to change. And men, man, we can be stubborn. Like I'm stubborn about a bunch of stuff, like you mentioned. It's like, but when it comes to this, I feel like men do eventually, probably a lot of your listeners, they hit a point where they go, fine, enough is enough. Like I need to change. I'm
Hmm.
gonna go on a diet. And men are a lot likely to stick on a diet or go on a diet and stick on it than a woman is. And I don't know why that dynamic is, but I do know from the man's perspective, men go finally hit a breaking point and are like, man, I gotta change. But it's not enough men yet. I mean, it's true about church too. 61% of church going people are women.
Hmm.
There are every single Sunday, there are 20 million more women in church than men. 25% of those women don't have their husband with them in the church. And so that it's not just in one area. I think it's pervasive. And I think men, this is a great podcast for us to say, hey, listen, we've got to take responsibility. We've got to be the ones to lead our family. The odds of a child going and staying in church dramatically increase if the father is in the church. But if it's just the
Yeah.
mother, they're less likely to go to church. The men, you set an example for your family. And if you're not there and maybe you're one of the men who's like, I've left my family, you still dominate your family in your absence. They are controlled and are manipulated by you not being there. So even if a man's like, well, I don't even want to be a part of this anymore. Well, guess what? You're still affecting your children and your wife or former wife. So men, we have a massive role to play in all this. And I think, I think a guy once said, it's like grandpa or something, hey, men are like trucks, they drive straight over the load. You need a layer of responsibility in the back of your truck bed
Hmm.
to understand that you've got something to carry. You need it. You've got a wife, you've got kids, you've got a job, whatever it is, brothers, sisters, moms, dads. You've got that responsibility and you've got to steward that responsibility well. You got to also include your body in the midst of that as a responsibility too.
Well, there's a lot of truth to the truck driving straight with a load in the back because men who are married with children, they make more than men the same age who are single in every category. They make more
Yeah,
money.
because they have to.
Yeah.
Because they have to. I mean, I'm fighting that battle now. My daughter she's on a club volleyball team. I got, you know, kids in private school. They
Hmm.
have responsibilities. They got to eat. They got sports. They've got outings. Like, my primary job is to go to work and to work hard so I can provide for them. Like I want my wife to be able to be home with the kids and to be able to do what she's doing with them. Like I
Hmm.
want that. And that's, is there easier financial ways to order our life? I suppose so. But the way I believe I'm called to steward my family is by me making sure that I'm doing the brunt of that work. And for my wife to be able to be freed up to do her role in our marriage, which is to care for our children. And we love that. And we have a very happy marriage as a result. And I wish other men, however they've decided to order their lives, I hope they see that, men, they have a massive responsibility to their families.
Yeah, I get a lot of men who I feel get upset because I put so much of the role and the consequences that happen in the household on men. And they often are like, well, what about the wife? This. And it's like, it's not that I'm bagging on men. I'm pointing out of how powerful we actually can be.
Come on.
And it's not to knock them down. It's to go like, hey, you have this much power. You have the ability to actually make the positive changes that you want to
Right.
see. Any positive change that you want to see in your household, you can do. You're not going to do it by implementing an iron fist, but if you do it by leading through your actions, I promise you, your household will change. Like I've even gone as far as saying, your wife cheats on you. There was something that you were missing that you were failing to do along the lines of the course of marriage to cheating. There was something that you did. You dropped the ball in some fashion, and maybe you were oblivious to it. But in the same note, you had the ability, and we still have the ability to mold our household to however we see fit, for the good or the bad.
It's true. I mean, I think this is an issue that goes. It's human nature, and I don't mean that like men are like this and women are. I mean that like literally God created men and women to be like God, but not to be like one another. They were created to be distinct, complementary beings
Mhm.
that are made equal in the image and likeness of God with different roles and responsibilities and functions. And when sin comes into the world in Genesis chapter 3, it sort of like throws everything off. So like the woman's desires now, she wants to rule over her husband. The man's desires that he wants to abdicate responsibility. And so when he says, like, oh, well, what about the wife? It's like, well, your curse was that you were going to work the ground and the work was going to produce thorns and thistles. Like it's supposed to be hard for a man to live in a world that's broken and fallen. It's
Mhm.
supposed to be difficult. She's got her own issues with childbearing and raising children and fighting her temptation to rule and reign over her husband. You've got yours. So a lot of men try to like allow the wife to shoulder half of his curse in the garden. And I think it's men's responsibility to pull that back to say, no, this is on me. And you're right. Like I've counseled a lot of married couples. I've done premarital counseling. I've counseled couples that are in trouble and issues with their marriage. An adultery or a divorce is never 100% one person and zero the other, no matter
Yeah.
how heinous. And so I think for the man, you need to say, what about this situation in a marriage can I control? What was the 1% or 10% or 90% that I contributed to this problem? That removes you from victim to player. When you're a victim, it means that you sort of lose the ability to be in control of your actions. When you
Mhm.
decide to be a victim, it takes away your power to change. And when men say, "Man, she did this. There's nothing I could do." Well, just understand that you sound exactly like Adam in Genesis chapter 3, who said,
Yeah.
it was the woman you gave me. She was the reason why I ate the fruit. She ate it and then she gave it to me, and so I ate it.
Mhm.
Adam, in that moment, abdicated responsibility for his actions. God shows up and he says, Adam, where are you? He doesn't say, Eve, where are you? He doesn't say, Adam and Eve, where are you? He says, Adam, where are you?
And he was
Adam, you have a
hiding.
responsibility. Yes, exactly. You have a responsibility to your family to steward it. And if you see what's happening, something's going wrong, you've got to be able to step in. And then when you do wrong, which you inevitably will, you need to take responsibility, because once you take responsibility, you can ask the question, okay, now what can I do now? What can I do about this now? If you say it was her fault, then there's nothing you can do at all. Like, oh, well, it's so expensive out there. She has to work, or it's so expensive out there. There's no way this and this can happen. It's like, well, now you can't do anything. Now you're a victim because
Yeah.
like the government or your wife. Instead, you need to say, okay, like it's really expensive now. Inflation's really high. What can I do about that? Now I can make a godly decision to change.
It's so true. And I love the Adam and Eve analogy. I filmed a video recently about that exact same thing
Awesome.
where
Love that.
Adam, so the serpent talks to Eve and says, "Hey, eat the apple, take a bite of the apple. Nothing bad is going to happen." He says, "You can't, you can." The thing that we don't realize, because there's a lack of context, because these stories had to be passed on for 3,000, 5,000 years. So we can't write all the intricate details, but Adam was still there. He was in her presence the whole time. And
He was.
he didn't take on the leadership role to say, Eve, this is something that we don't do. Instead, he sat back, wanted to see what was going to happen. Oh, nothing happened. So then I'll take a bite too.
Yeah.
It's literally the example that I was just giving of someone tempts your wife. There was something along the way that you failed to do, which was lead.
Come on.
Adam failed to lead her in that exact scenario. And for us to think that it's just her fault is it's lame. It's so lame. Yeah.
Well, there's a huge difference between fault and responsibility. So that's how I break it up. Like your wife, let's say she cheats on you. It's her fault. She cheated on you. She wasn't supposed to. But
Mhm.
ultimately, that falls under your responsibility. You are responsible. My daughter gets suspended from school, let's say, or my son gets kicked out of school. It's his fault,
Mm-hmm.
but that's my responsibility as a man. I've got to take ownership. What could I do as a father differently the next time? Now, I'm not going to control anyone. They're responsible for their own actions. I get that. But if you're under the banner of my family and with my last name, then I'm responsible for
Yes.
the rearing of my children. I'm responsible for the income in our home. I'm responsible for the types of food we put on the table. And I'm responsible for the faithfulness of all of our family units, all of our family components of the entire family unit. And so, yeah, if my wife commits adultery on me, it's her fault, but it's my responsibility. So what could I do differently in the future? Again, if it's purely her, then oh, woe is me. There's nothing I can do. I can't change. I can't be anything different. I don't think that's the right way to go about life. And I think that's the result of so much of the atomification, so to speak, of culture, of men in general, and it's really playing itself out in society right now, and we kind of see it all over television.
Mm-hmm. And unless you're humble and you get rid of your pride and insecurities, you're probably not going to acknowledge your responsibility. I had a guy going through a divorce. We're talking, and out of frustration, he says, she wasn't that good of a mom anyway. She was drinking every night. She was doing this. And my only reply was, you allowed that under your household, under your roof, in your house.
Mm.
And he just was like, quiet, and then said, damn, you're right. And it's like, well, yeah, it's easy to put the blame. It's a lot harder to actually be humble enough to take the responsibility of, yeah, I actually allowed all those actions under my roof in my household.
Come on. Well, yeah, I mean, even like sociologically, like every addict has a codependent attached. So if your wife's drinking every single night, someone's allowing that to happen under their watch, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
as a husband, it's like, well, how did you let that get to that level? And you can't control her, but did you say anything? Did you attempt to get any help for an addiction? Did you have any conversations? What was your role in this scenario? My wife's gone through junk. I've gone through junk. Like I have a responsibility to her and to our family, to our kids, to be able to say, hey, what's going on here? How do we work on this? What are you not getting? What do you need? And we don't ask those questions enough. And some of it is kind of related to what we talked about with pastors and sort of like allowing government, politics, social media to sort of dictate the societal norms. We've sort of done that with our families too, where we're like, well, we've got this sort of egalitarian, so to speak, perspective on the world. So what I mean by that is, men and women are the same, not just equal, but the same. But God didn't make us for sameness. He made us for uniqueness. Men have a unique role and responsibility to play, and women have a unique role and responsibility to play. And so men and women are the same. Then so you look at your spouse and she's struggling and she's like drinking every night. You go, well, I mean, we're the same. It's her responsibility. She should be changing. It's not my place to say anything. Like, of course, like I can't overstep my boundaries. And it's like, we've got all this like weird, bizarre, like cultural language over us, and we don't have like a biblical framework to work from and an instinctual framework to work from. And as a result, women are actually suffering. I mean, I taught an 11-week series on marriage last fall, and I just asked the question, hey, we're going to talk about men today. And maybe women get upset about that. We're only going to focus on men. But I was like, which woman here would not benefit in society if all men were better? No hands go up, because every woman understands that better men equals better society. So why would we be upset if men are getting some attention? I forget who says it, but the phrase, I think it's Scott Galloway, the NYU guy, he talks about, empathy is not a zero-sum game. Like we can be empathetic and supportive of men and support and help men to be stronger. And that doesn't have to pull away from the empathy from women. And somehow in society, we've gotten it crossed up where we need to like care deeply for women and men get zero attention. And I'm already going, no. Let's care about men because men make societies better. We need better men to make better families, and better men and better families make better communities and better cities and better government and better everything. So let's give the men the attention they need. And men need to understand they should not be abdicating that responsibility anymore, because that's led to the sort of mess we're in as a culture.
Yeah, I mean, I could go down a controversial rabbit hole on that one as far as
Go for it. Yeah.
If
I don't know what
we
kind of
don't,
podcast this is. If this is that kind of podcast, then let her
oh,
rip, man.
yeah, I mean, it's my show, not yours. So I'll say
That's right.
whatever I want.
Come on.
The thing about better men that society often does not take into account is every single right that a woman has was granted by men. Every single one. The right to vote was granted by men. Freedoms, anything that they do. You go to other countries today, women aren't allowed to drive. Women are covered head to toe.
Crazy.
Women can't vote. In various countries, I'm not talking a certain area. So many Eastern countries, women have zero rights. They're
It's
merely
true.
admired for their beauty or a service they can provide. And it is because of good men that in the Western world, women are free to do pretty much as they choose. And without good men looking out for the benefit of women, those things are taken away. I promise you, if we were hypothetically invaded by an Eastern country tomorrow, all our women and children would be enslaved in some sort of fashion or another that they weren't used to if men decided not to be masculine and go off to war. It's just that simple. So we need more good men who are willing to do dangerous things and for the benefit of those who they love around them.
I mean, you said that's controversial. I guess it is in culture. I'd say, you know, if you get enough men together who want to commit chaos, they'll commit the chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter what women or children or think, or even if good men are outnumbered, if enough bad men get together to do bad things happen. That's
Yeah.
just society. And you can look at that from a Christian standpoint. Certainly, you also can look at that from an atheistic standpoint. You could say, "Hey, like the strong eat the weak." That's that's Darwinism at play.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
strong eat the weak. And so, if enough hundreds of thousands, millions of men decide that something is going to be true, then by God, it's true. That's how societies work. And so, I think what you're saying is right. If good men get together who are strong and courageous and say, hey, this is how we're going to do things, then good societies can flourish. That's why Christianity is so scandalous. Jesus' ethic was that men and women were made equal in the image and likeness of God, to
Mm-hmm.
be like God, but not like one another, to be co-equals, but co-unique and and complementary and distinct. And so as a result, women got a higher status in society and culture as Christendom progressed. And so we love to pick on Christendom for like all crusades and various wars and such. But let me just say that women's role in society drastically changed with the coming of Christ. That is like an irrefutable fact throughout history. We saw that happen. The United States was largely, as it's currently constructed, was largely developed by a group of people who wanted religious freedom, to have freedom of religion in a culture and society that we have today. And as a result, women's got significant rights because they were coming from a biblical framework and a biblical worldview.
Yeah.
That is not controversial. It's just that we forget that good men, especially men who follow Christ and men that have a biblical framework, and understand their, like you mentioned, humility, are humble enough to admit their faults and to take responsibility, man, they create good societies. I love that.
Well, I guess the controversial part is that women often, and I'm not picking on all women, but women in a political narrative often feel that women took their rights, and through feminist
Ah,
movements, that's how they got their rights. When the reality is, men who started America, the Western culture, was founded on Judeo Christian values. And without those and those men, they wouldn't have those things. We
that's
lose
true.
World War II. They don't fucking have the things that they have today. It's
I mean,
plain and
yeah.
simple. Or World War One, either of those. It's
Yeah.
like then that it's not the same thing.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that principle still applies. Like, I think if you're looking at men and you're saying, hey, most men, because they were strong and because they were courageous, they fought in these wars. They fought for the freedoms that women have in like a place like United States, and so the opportunity for people to have. I mean, this applies to other things outside of gender. Like you think about race, you think about culture, you think
Mhm.
about The idea that people could like go against the United States, say, I hate America or whatever. The reason why that's even allowed is because good men fought in wars
Yes.
to provide that level of freedom. So yeah, again, like, yeah, I guess that is very controversial to say, because it's like, well, women fought for that. It's like, well, again, if enough men got together, they could prevent whatever they wanted to prevent, because that is because men are different and stronger, and they have a significant, again, enough men together in one group, hundreds of thousands, they could take whatever they'd like by force. And that's happened all throughout human history.
All throughout history.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of fighting, let's talk about fighting for marriages. Because I feel in today's day and age, it's just so easy and to get divorced, and there's really not a value put on marriage like there should be, and that there's supposed to be biblically. And even this kind of a two-parter, husbands providing their wives with an opportunity to raise their children. I would kind of want to lump both of those conversations, because you were talking about how you're fortunate enough that your wife is raising your children, staying at home. You're able to provide the lifestyle. My wife's a stay-at-home mom. And I've had literally Christian men who go to my church unfollow me for saying things like this. Like, how could you tell your wife to go work for another man to help them build a business and let strangers program and raise your children?
Wow.
And it's
yeah. I mean, how did that conversation go? I mean, why did they unfollow you? Like, what was the thing that was bugging them so dang much? Like, what happened?
Oh, they're climbing the ladder, which on one hand, it's like, good for you guys. You guys are climbing the financial ladder. You guys both got your rocking careers, but it doesn't mean I'm wrong. And when you have, I guess we have societal blinders on that we want to, get that adult report card going. And it's like, but our offspring are really the only legacy we will ever leave behind, is our offspring, that name, my last name and my son's, and how they're representing that name and continuously doing so with their children.
Come on.
So
yeah, it's a controversial topic, man, because, again, like, I mean, this isn't different from like this isn't a massive jump from the conversation we were just having. I mean, society has changed and shifted over the years. It doesn't mean it's always a good thing. I think this, like, the myth of like progress is that, one, we're actually going somewhere, which is like kind of a myth in and of itself. I mean, the fact that the myth of progress is an interesting one to kind of go down. But I think, like, thinking about, what's your chief end as a man? Like, what is your deepest desire? Well, if you're making a purely financial decision, like all other factors off the table, I'm making a purely financial, economical decision. Well, obviously, like, math says that two people working, most of the time, it's not even true all of the time, by the way, but most of the time, that's better that two people would work. But I don't think someone who, I don't think someone who follows the scriptures should certainly make a purely financial decision. I mean, we see that all over the scripture. You have the parable of the rich fool. Hey, tonight your soul's required of you. All the stuff you've acquired, where's it going to go? You're going to die today. Other things need to matter. A mentor said to me, there's two things that matter the most. And there's only two things that last forever: making babies and making disciples. Hey, you making followers of Jesus, you have a spiritual legacy, and you have a physical, legitimate, like, biological legacy to leave. And so for me, and what I believe the scriptures teaches, is you've got to look at this holistically. You've got a financial component, you've got a spiritual component, you've got a familial component, you've got a marital component, you've got a connection with your own God and your relationship, and you need to make the best decision biblically for your family. And the idea that we would come out and just make a purely financial decision to say it's good that she's working and it's good that I'm working because we make more money means, well, what's your chief end? What's your goal? So that way, when you get the knock at the door and it says, tonight your soul's required of you, you've made the best decision you can. Well, I know that, like, hey, listen, if the Lord calls me home, I've made a decision to say that the rearing of my children is perhaps the most important thing, aside from my relationship with God first, my relationship with my wife, and then my relationship, and then my children. So I order my life: God, marriage, children. That is the progressive priority list that any biblical man should have. And so if you've got that order, then it's not always the best decision that both of you are out of the home. And like you mentioned, if you outsource the rearing of your kids to the government, well, gosh, that's getting increasingly terrifying to do.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't be sure, just say my kid's going into public school, even private school, is the best decision for my kids going forward. Maybe it is a homeschool. Maybe it is, a wife who's home, but then when the kids go to school, she's working, whether that's, part-time or from home or starting a business or something like that. I mean, the Proverbs 31 woman's a great example. Proverbs 31. Hey, this woman, her primary objective was to make the lives of the people around her better. She was concerned with her husband and her family. What she was able to fit in after that was, hey, I can start businesses on the side. I can go trade. So she was into trading materials and doing some agrarian farming. She could do all these different things, but it wasn't at the sacrifice of the benefit of her family. It was to the benefit of it. And too many people will go, well, everyone's got to a job, so I'm just going to do that and my kids will be fine. Well, meanwhile, little Timmy's struggling at school. They're learning about God knows what in the public schools, or God knows what in whatever school they're in. And you barely see your wife. You and your wife barely see your kids. And now all of a sudden you're drinking 3, 4, 5 glasses of wine at night just to calm down from the crazy life you have. And you become like these sideways alcoholics, like functional alcoholics that don't have a relationship with your family. And you go, well, but we've got a new SUV in the driveway. We've got a new house. We've got the family vacations every twice a year.
Yep.
Is that the goal? No, my goal is the flourishing of my family spiritually first and foremost, and that we're all living connected. And that may mean, hey, sacrifice on the financial end, so that way you can have a wife that loves her children, who's called into, Titus talks about homeward and orientation. She's called to be homeward oriented, to build up the edify her children, to edify her husband, to edify the home. And then on top of that, if she's got space to be able to do other things outside of that, then hey, by all means, handle that business. But hey, man, there's too many people that think money is the number one thing, and it's just ripping people apart. And no wonder why 51% of marriages end in divorce.
Yeah, the divorce thing, man, we don't even use the D word in my house. Not even joking. It's just been a rule forever.
We call it the D word too.
Yeah. My wife and I have been together a long time, and I've always told her since the day I met her, I'm getting married one time and one time only.
Come on.
Regardless of what happens. And it took us, so we actually didn't get married until 2 or 3 years ago. We had children first. We did not do it the way that we're supposed to do it. But I didn't actually have any, you could say I didn't have that older brother, the father figures who were telling me to get married. So it's one of the reasons why I tell young men, get married. Why are you wasting your time dating? You're wasting her time if you're not going to commit to that girl. What are you guys wasting each other's time? What are you doing? Because I didn't have that. Now I wouldn't go back in time if Elon invents the time machine and change any of it.
He might.
He's the guy. I think that's going to be the one thing that God says, no. And Elon will always be like, yeah, it's just the one piece that I'm missing. Just can't figure out this one piece. And God's like, yeah, that's because you ain't messing with time.
Ooh,
but
yeah.
But I wouldn't change it. But the amount that our lives changed for the better after we got married and truly made the commitment before God in our community, dude, I'm like,
come on.
I want everybody to experience what me and my wife have. Everyone. The amount of love that I have for her, I actually never could fathom the amount of love that I would have for a human being, for my wife. I did not understand that. And it continuously grows because we not only work on a relationship, but I believe there's this little threesome thing going with me, her, and God, that we keep him in the center. And it's praying. Let's dive into our Bible. How do we go through this obstacle? And how do you go through the obstacle without without God in that centerpiece in the covenant. I forget where I was even going with that, but
Well, I mean,
the
I'll
thing with
just, I agree with you. Yeah, no, keep going. Sorry.
the thing with the divorce thing,
Mhm.
I also tell people there's nothing in the Bible that talks about a soulmate or the one. He God gives Adam a partner. He doesn't give Adam a business, children, a ranch, anything else. He gives he gives Adam a helper
Yeah.
who is his wife. Okay? So it's like it's going to be hard. There's going to be times of trials and tribulations that we have to be willing to work through
Yeah.
because we are human. We are sinners. None of us are perfect. It's not supposed to be easy, especially living a Christian life. It is not easy. We're persecuted around the world. Whether people think we're not persecuted or not in the US, we are.
Well, it's a
It's
different kind of persecution.
yeah, it's persecution in many different forms
Hmm.
throughout the world. And we have to continuously work, and when we are fighting for our marriage, it is only going to build that marriage stronger. It's like forging metal together.
Hmm.
You don't just get one piece of metal and slap it together and it's like there it is. When you start to meld, you heat that thing and fold it on top of each other and you keep doing it,
Mm.
it gets stronger and stronger every time. And those are just your trials and tribulations. It's hot. No, it sucks when it's hot and you're in the fire.
Hmm. Yeah, it's
But
hard. Marriage is
fi-
hard.
yeah, and fighting for it, man. It's like you have to because we have the easy way out these days. We do.
Yeah. There's no doubt about it. I mean, divorce has never been easier. It's still obviously expensive, but that's not the point. Like again, like if you structure your whole
Yeah.
life around financial decisions, I guess then well maybe you care about the price of divorce. But um, like how I do it, for me and my house, we're gonna serve the Lord. And I read Matthew chapter 19, and the Pharisees come to Jesus and say, Jesus, like they're trying to trick him. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any cause? And he's like, Moses gave in the Pentateuch gave the Israelites certificates of divorce for their hardness of heart, but from the beginning it was not so. And Jesus is like referencing, but before sin enters the world, that was never my design. The two are no longer two, but one. We become one flesh.
Yeah.
They're ichad. They're together. And so what God has joined together, let no man separate. And what he means is like, hey, you don't understand. If you think your body is distinct from your spirit, then you don't get this. But what Jesus is saying is, no, they're the same thing. And when you get married before the eyes of God, you are becoming one entity, two complementary parts coming together to be a whole, to worship the Creator God. And what God has joined together, we don't separate, we don't tear. It's like performing surgery by tearing a person in half. That's
Hmm.
essentially what's happened. And so, that's the ethic I live by because I believe it's an ancient way. I'm not going to trust something that got invented 60, 70 years ago on some podcast or some blog or some book. Like all of this stuff is kindling. Like that this is all going to burn. What's not going to burn is the ancient ways of Jesus. And I'm going to bet on that. I'm going to bet
Hmm.
on the fact that God is correct and that I'm going to love my wife no matter the cost. And you're right, behind the sacrifice of a hard marriage, of walking through hard seasons in a marriage, I should say, is going to be greater bonding, greater levels of cohesiveness. When you've been in the foxhole with somebody, as many of my military buddies can attest, you have there's an unmovable bond. There's a bond that forms between guys that have been when together when the bullets are flying. To a lesser degree, on the football field, when you're together with someone in a team sport and you've been through it together, and you've been in those 110-degree days when it's hot and you're running together, there is a bond that happens. You're like, man, that guy understands me. And a marriage level, it's true too. When I look at my wife, we've been married a long time. We've got 4 beautiful children. We've been through hard things. We've walked through these troubles and trials. We look at each other. We go, man, there's no one that understands what I've been through like you've been through. And so when the bullets fly again, we know how to maneuver. And
Hmm.
when you get divorced in a marriage, let's say you've been married 6 years and you get divorced. You don't get to start your next marriage at year 7. You go back to year 1 and you got to fight through all that junk again. You don't get to like start where your last one left off, and people forget that. That's why statistically you're likely to get divorced a second time if you've been divorced once. And if you've been divorced crazy enough 3 times, you have a 75% chance of getting divorced in that third marriage. Like, you cannot hit the eject button in a marriage because all of the good stuff is beyond the sacrifice. People like miss this about
Yeah.
marriage. And so even whether it's adultery or addiction or loss of a child, something like that, bankruptcy, man, fighting through that creates a stronger bond and makes stronger children. And the statistics on kids and how kids flourish under the impact of a married couple are significant. Like, there is no buts about it. A man and a woman in a home married together is better for children. Why?
Yeah.
That's because that's how God designed it to work. If we put 2 men or 2 women in a marriage, or we put 1 woman, like I was raised, a single mother, father left, or a single father, the families don't flourish the way they do with a man and a woman in a home. It makes intuitive sense. It makes spiritual sense. I just wish more people would see this. And sometimes they need to come to know Christ so that they will actually see their marriages through the lens of how God sees their marriages, which is permanent.
Amen, brother.
I could preach on this all day, man. Like, I'm obviously a preacher, but I think I think the main point stands. I think ultimately sin makes us mistrust God's design for marriage. And so we feel like we want to make ourselves a way that we feel is better. But man, I know enough people to know, and statistically we know that just marriages aren't as happy or relationships, I should say, aren't as happy when we don't follow God's design for loyalty, for faithfulness within the covenant of God's marriage.
Mm-hmm. Well, awesome. I mean, we can end there if you gotta go, or if you want to keep talking about this topic, we can
I
go
mean,
until you got to get off.
I got a few more minutes. If you want to keep going, I can jump off. Whatever you want to do, man.
No, no, I'm gonna take up those few more minutes of yours, and we'll keep talking about marriage.
Cool.
Yeah, because what do you got? 6, 7 minutes, 8
Yep.
minutes?
Yep.
Okay. Um, yeah, marriage. So what would you tell? So what is your go-to when people are struggling who are Christian?
For their marriage, like in
Yeah,
general.
the marriage, struggling. One of them are questioning.
Well, I always start at the top. Like, I think it's like, if you have the foundation settled, then you're better off with the marriage. So, like, there are practical and like strategic things you can do in a marriage that will help your marriage if you're not like a followers of God, let's say. But let's set that aside for a second, and we can talk about it if you want. If you don't have a common singular higher authority, then your marriage will struggle. So if you don't agree on who is God, then it's very difficult to have a flourishing marriage. Now, I hear people say all the time, "You don't understand. I'm Jewish. She's Hindu. We have a great marriage." Okay, you can have a decent marriage, but you won't understand what human flourishing is like in the context of following God together, following Christ together, if you're not a Christian. So that's always my first question. Like, what's your faith like? Are you strong in the faith? Do you believe that you're a sinner? Because you're getting your ethical and spiritual framework, your moral framework from God. So if I believe that I'm a flawed person, that I can't always see things clearly, that I have blind spots, which, by the way, that's the definition of a blind spot, is that you can't see it. So you should at least go, yeah, there's probably a blind spot because I don't know if I have them. Like, that's what they are. If you can't get there, then it's hard for you to be in a marriage because you'll always just think, well, she's wrong. Like, you end up like Adam. Like, well, it's the woman you gave me. She's the problem. But if I know, hey, listen, I could be wrong, then I can go into a marriage and say, hey, listen, like, this is how I'm seeing it. This is how you're seeing it. I could be wrong. What do you think? And now you're gonna come in with mutual humility to come to a conclusion. And then if we both agree that there's a higher authority, we can always appeal to that higher authority. There's an appeals court. Hey, what does the scripture say? Well, hey, you've been out at the bar, husband, let's say, 2-3 nights a week. You missed little Timmy's basketball games, and well, he's like, well, I'm the man. You should just do what I say. That's the marriage. It's like, well, the wife can say, hold on a second. Like, 1 Timothy 5:8 says, if a man does not provide for the needs of his family, he's denied the faith and worse than an unbeliever. That's what the scripture says. And if I believe that too, I can say, oh yeah, okay, like, I'm the one that needs to come to a conclusion of how I need to change in that scenario. So all of a sudden we have a higher authority. So I always begin with the higher authority. I also tell married couples, like, don't be afraid to get help in your marriage. Like, we can't solve everything within it. If you have good, godly, biblical accountability for separately for the woman and separately for the man, that's a really good thing. And then if needed, coming together to get some biblical counseling from a local pastor or even from like a high quality counseling center that is biblically based. I always refer people in those into those scenarios.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, if someone is of faith, I always believe that they need to be doing their counseling with someone who is of faith as well.
I think there's like non-Christian stuff that can give you, of course, like decent wisdom. Like you can learn, hey, like this is how you should talk to somebody and this is how you should not. You can learn communication dynamics or whatever. That's true. But I think ultimately the highest authority is most helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's helpful for married couples to independently do work in their past. Like for me, my dad wasn't around. Like you mentioned, hey, I didn't have like these figures in my life helping me. I didn't have those older brother type figures. Like, what has that done to me, and how do I see the world in an incorrect way as a result of that?
Mm-hmm.
That's a helpful thing for you to gain awareness on. So that way you can understand what she's going through when she's with you. I always think one of the best questions any married couple can ask one another, man or woman, is, hey, tell me the truth. What is it like to be with me? Like, give me that knowledge. What do you feel? She might say, like, you know what? For the most part, I really enjoy our time, but I'm always a little bit walking on eggshells with you around. Like, I don't know about you, but I don't want my wife walking on eggshells around me. You know, I want her free and open and be able to say what's on her mind and to laugh and have a good time. And so most men don't even know what their wife truly thinks about them. So ask, what's it like to be with me? I would also ask, as a man, ask 5 other people around you at work. You might be shocked by the answer you get. That like, oh man, dude, like you're always in my business. You're always you're overbearing. Or like, actually, I don't really know you at all. I've never really heard anything about you.
Mm-hmm.
People you might think are your best friends might not even really know you. Gaining that awareness is so helpful for your marriage.
Awareness is huge. I went through an awareness phase when my wife were first together because we've been together 14 years. Well,
Mm-hmm.
13. This will be
Yeah.
our 14th holiday season. 13 years, we're doing our 14th holiday season. But yeah, I went through an awareness phase of having to work on myself, going back. And when I look back, it's like, man, that sucked for her.
I've been
That
there
did.
too. It makes you feel
Yeah.
better. I'm like, wow, I can't believe you've been married to me this long. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You hit
It's
those
like, man, you
stages.
put up with a lot because the things that I would say about that guy aren't nice things.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I've been there, man. Like
Yep.
I literally, me and my wife planted a church in San Francisco, and I'm from the Bay Area originally. And the things I put her through in that time, because grew up poor, grew up, getting my house broken into, grew up in the hood, and my wife is this like suburbs of Seattle, good marriage. Dad was a pastor. I grew up not of the faith, just totally, lost my mom, passed away when I was 13. I just grew up so differently that like what I thought was normative to her was like was like watching a car crash. And I was like, oh no, you should be fine. Like it's the neighborhood's fine. And she's like, well, like I'm not raising my kids here. And like the things that I thought were normal to her, I had to get outside people to say, hey, listen, like she's got a significant point here. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe I even thought we should do this, or this. I
Mm-hmm.
can't even believe I thought that. And so gaining that awareness is huge for a marriage and vice versa, right? Like there's things you're probably seeing about your wife. She has no idea. And so it's like, well, she's got to do that work too. So it's
Mm-hmm.
helpful for both of the people to do that work.
Yeah. And it's helpful to have those hard conversations where you're willing to be, humble, open, and honest. Hey, I see you're doing this. What's the underlying real issue?
Come on.
Or me, it's like, hey, because in my past, I had a thing. I had to win every argument. I was fucking lawyering her ass up. Lawyer is what I was doing, and it does no good. Zero.
Right.
There's zero benefit in winning an argument. But that was the thing. She wanted to argue. It's like, I'm gonna win this. And it's like, no, you
Yeah.
literally said these words. But that just because a woman says these words, it doesn't necessarily convey what she means.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I had to be like, okay, I got to step back because this isn't good. It's not healthy. But there's a
Well,
series of things I could go on that I had to change in my life. Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure we all could, man. There's a lot to learn. I just say, as a married couple, the most important thing you could do in a marriage is, first, like, know who you both worship. The second thing is know the person you're going to marry, and come, like, the best way to solve a lot of this is to get on the same page before you even take the plunge. If there's married single people, or dating people listening in,
Mhm.
it's like, ask these questions before you get married. And, like, for me, I got a fighter. I got a wife that wants to, and not in a negative way, someone that, like, wants to grow and never wants to settle in our marriage. Like, we want the best marriage we can have. And if you've got a partner like that to go do life with, man, then, man, the sky's the limit for a married couple.
Yeah.